Welcome everyone to the V3 implementation call. Today, September 22nd. We appreciate you being here with us today. Just as a means of reminder, please update your name in the participant list with your affiliation, especially if you're a software vendor, but also if you're a state or a researcher or one of our national partners. It really helps us to track participation and understand if we need to do more outreach with different groups of our stakeholders. So we appreciate you taking the time to do that in the participant list. We are recording, so these calls are made available on our website and also on our YouTube channel. So you're always welcome to go back and look at those. Our very talented Chris Hoffman timestamps them, so you can go back and look at one spot or one item on the agenda and not necessarily have to watch the entire V3 call. Please be prepared to take yourself off mute or use chat during the discussions. If you've got questions, comments, something to add to the discussion, please feel free to bring it up either verbally or in chat. We do watch that closely, and we also document all the chat and keep that for our reference as well. So we appreciate you communicating in all the different ways. Let me go ahead and move to our agenda. And real quick, before I turn it over to Laurel, I just wanted to reiterate a message that we sent out to the Google group last week. Actually, I think it was this week on Monday. We are really sad to be losing Atim Effiong. She is moving on to a new adventure. So in the meantime, if you have been working with Atim for vendor compliance or other specific issues, Laurel Baeder and Sujata Shinde are still doing the compliance testing. You can reach out to them. If it's a state-related issue, Monet and Laurel are happy and stand ready to take any state issues. And then if there are any other questions, feel free to contact me or Clay. We're happy to do that. And we will also be posting a position. So I'm doing a shameless plug, and I'm just putting it out there. We will be backfilling Atim's position, and even though there'll be hard shoes to fill, we want to just put it out there that we will be looking for somebody who is looking for a change, interested in joining the NEMSIS team. This position will be specific to vendor support and vendor compliance. And we are looking for somebody who has some EMS experience and even maybe some vendor experience. So we're not looking to poach. We're not poaching, but we're just putting it out there for you to share that opportunity with anybody you may know that might be looking for a change. All right, shameless plug over, just have to do it. Now I think I can turn it over to Laurel, and she's going to give us a maintenance update.
All right, good morning, everyone. So this month, our maintenance window does happen to fall this week, the same week as the call. Kind of a funny way, the way those Tuesdays and Wednesdays lined up. So maintenance is yesterday and today. Today, we do have some maintenance being done on the website and the Tableau server just to complete some upgrades. This morning, you will experience downtimes on both the website and Tableau if you try and access dashboards or the website. And I would just ask that, as always, if you have a problem today, please check back later, tomorrow, and everything should be up and running. If you notice any issues, please feel free to let us know. If you have any submissions that fail during the maintenance period, please just resubmit them at a later time. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email or a message on in the Zoom meeting or however you would like to get in contact. Thanks.
Any questions for Laurel? All right. Next on our agenda, Josh Legler is going to go through some 3.5 Schematron Diagnostics. Josh, I will stop sharing so you can have the screen.
Okay, thanks. Here we go. We wanted to let you know of a hotfix that we need to do in the NEMSIS version 3.5.0 Schematron structure, and wanted to just explain what we'll be doing there. I think it'll have minimal impact on vendor development efforts and things, but we want you to be aware of it. The NEMSIS diagnostic for NEMSIS 3.5.0 Schematron files is a little bit different than it is for 3.4.0 and previous. And as you recall, this NEMSIS diagnostic has to be included in every Schematron file that's published for use with NEMSIS. So for example, as a state creates their version 3.5.0 Schematron file, this NEMSIS diagnostic needs to be in there down at the bottom of the file. And it has to be an exact copy of the NEMSIS diagnostic structure as published by NEMSIS. As we were looking through the NEMSIS diagnostic and getting ready to do some training and stuff, I realized that we had left out one important piece or change here in 3.5.0, and that is to support UUIDs in the NEMSIS diagnostic. So I've highlighted in bold here the piece that we're going to be adding into this NEMSIS diagnostic structure for 3.5.0 so that when there is a failed assertion in a Schematron validation process, that the diagnostic output will give not only the state or agency or patient care report number where that issue happened, but also the UUID of the object that issue happened in. So diagnostic output will change in this way. You'll not only get those D agency and E record elements to help you know which record had the problem, but you'll also, if applicable, get a UUID there as well. And of course, as we know, the advantage of the UUID is that there's only going to be one object in your file that has that UUID. And so it makes it easy to use the UUID to go back and identify, this is the record or group element where the issue happened. So that was an oversight in the initial development of the 3.5.0 Schematron code. And we want to get that addressed and get that in there before we have a bunch of states submitting their NEMSIS 3.5.0 Schematron files and have to change a bunch of existing schemas. So that's the reason for the hot fix. We are going to take care of a couple small things in the national Schematron files. And so these will be minimal impact, but a little bit of house cleaning. So I'll show you a couple examples of what we're going to do there. This example here, there's a rule that says that race should be recorded when there was a patient who was cared for. And you might recall race is a one-to-many data element. The existing rule looks like this. The context is ePatient.14 and when it's blank. So this rule fires on every blank ePatient.14. The small issue here is, let's say there is a patient care report that contains multiple copies of ePatient.14 that are all blank. This is technically valid according to the XSD. And so you could see this in real life, although it would be rare. And this rule would end up firing on all three of these individually. So you would get this message 3 times in this patient care report, when really we only need to see the message once. So a small technical fix to the context of this rule is to make it so it only fires on the first instance of the blank element. And so that way, even though there's 3 copies of this blank element or 3 instances, we just get the rule firing once and we get the message shown once. So there's no change really to the business logic or intent of the rule, but a little bit of a technical cleanup to not have a bunch of kind of duplicate rules firing off. In, as I say, rare cases, I think it would be unusual that a software product would create XML like this, but it is possible. And the other fix we're going to do, we have 3 rules where the message is missing a space between the word destination and the word is. And so I showed one of those 3 rules here. And we're just going to add in that space. So a little typo fix there in the national rules for EMS data set. Okay, so what this will involve is updating the 350 Schematron requirements and the accompanying documentation. That NHTSA diagnostic will be updated. So if you are developing 350 Schematron schemas for the state level or other levels, you'll need to grab that updated diagnostic and just copy and paste it into the Schematron files that you're developing. We'll update the Schematron development kit, of course, with those updated resources. And because we are fixing that typo that I mentioned here, and the Schematron rules, national rules, are embedded in the data dictionary, it means we actually will do a rebuild of the data dictionary pages. Again, no other changes in there. The only change you'll see is those 3 rules that'll have a space added between those 2 words where there wasn't before. But it does involve a rebuild of the data dictionary pages. And then we'll update the national Schematron schemas with the new NHTSA diagnostic structure, as well as those couple of small fixes that I outlined. And the plan is to get this out by the 1st of October. So we're looking at the end of next week. So are there questions about what this change involves, how it might impact things that you're working on right now? We want to be very careful to have minimal impact, but we felt that doing it now would be better than later.
Is there some reason why you decided not to just make it 3.5.1?
I think because the data dictionary, the XSD has no changes in it. So there's really no structural changes to the standard.
So we leave it backwards compatibility for anybody that's already through testing is going to be fine.
Yeah, so anyone who's gone through testing has been tested on their ability to deploy new Schematron schemas, and they would not be needing to make any change to their code for generating XML data since the XSD has no change.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think the one area of impact would be if you have a product that helps your customers generate Schematron schemas in version 3.5.0, then you'll need to grab that new NHTSA diagnostic structure that gets included into that schema that you generate. All right, any other questions on this one? Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Josh. Next on our agenda, Monet is going to share with everyone the results of the survey that she sent out to states regarding DEM files and dFacility.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon. Can you see my screen okay, Julianne?
Yep, sure can.
Fantastic. Okay. So you all may recall on previous conversations about populating DIM files or agency DIM files, who's responsible for that. And we've also had several conversations about dFacility information. So based on the request of a vendor and a few states, we created a 2-question survey, sent it out over the 2 weeks, and waited for those responses to come back. So I want to thank you for everyone who participated and just answered the questions on the survey. Here's a link to the survey, and I'll also add that to the chat in case you have not yet had an opportunity to respond. 41 responses came in. And basically the first question is, what are your requirements for EMS agencies to complete the demographic files? 18 states responded that the states require agencies to submit those files. 6 states responded that states do not require the agencies to submit the DIM files, and 9 states responded that the state allows the agencies to submit the DIM files, but does not require them to do so. And then there were 8 states that had variation of other responses. The second question was about how your dFacility information is populated. The intent of this question is to try and resolve an issue where we have one facility with 15 different spellings or spaces between the title of the facility or facility location. 19 states responded that they use their state licensing management system or some other form of state information to populate the information. And then the rest were sort of a mixed bag of information, how the information is populated. Currently, we have 43 states listed on the NHTSA website that have a facility list in the state data set. However, of the 41 states that responded to the survey, 7 of those states do not have a facility, the facility information loaded into the state data set. In some cases, there may simply be an Excel spreadsheet, but the information is not in the state data set. So we would love to take 15 minutes, 30 minutes of your time if you're interested to allow us an opportunity to help you populate that information. We do realize that everyone is busy with the response to the COVID pandemic, but if this is important to you, it's a quick fix, and we'll be happy to help you to resolve some of these issues. As it relates to the DIM agency information, some facilities, we've been waiting almost 2 years to get the DIM files. So now that we have this information about which states require agencies to populate the information, we would really like to work closely with you to help resolve this issue as well. This will actually impact the failed submission rate. So we would like to really get some of those failed file issues or failed submission issues resolved. And populating the DIM file is really going to take care of that quite easily. So that's my report. Are there any questions? Okay, if you have questions, please send me an email or send some information in the chat. Thank you so much for your time. Have a fabulous rest of your day.
Thank you to the states that participate in those surveys that Monet sends out. It is really very helpful to get a good perspective on what's going on across the country. Next on the agenda, items from the Office of EMS with Mr. Eric Chaney.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just have one thing I wanted to address this morning. We've talked about this. This is the version 3.4 extension. Version 3.5 is what we talked about, continuing on its current path. We met with the state data managers yesterday. We're setting up a time with DIA and the SEMSO to talk with the state directors and get that to final resolution. I think we all agreed that everybody seems to be on the same page about extending the 3.4 timeline, maintaining the 3.5, letting that up to the states. But we wanted to run that by the state directors. As I said to the data managers yesterday, I hear loud and clear you want that decision sooner rather than later. So we are moving that. We're trying to get that date set today. In fact, I've been exchanging emails with Clay and him about the agenda for that meeting. While we have them, we'll talk about numerous things related to NHTSA. If there's anything special you think we need to run by the state directors while we have them in the room, shoot Clay or Julianne or myself an email. We'll be happy to make sure that's on the agenda as well. That's the only thing I have for the group, unless you have something specific for me.
Any questions for Eric? Monet put the link to the survey in the chat. So if you're a state data manager and haven't had an opportunity to fill that out, we'd love for you to be able to do that. Next up,
Julianne, just one other thing, and I'm not sure if it's on the agenda for a separate item. I apologize if it is. I'll just hit the high level version of it. We wanted to talk about submission rates. We've been talking about the timely submission of data into the NHTSA TAC, and we've been talking with the data managers about that the last couple of meetings. That'll definitely be on the agenda for the state directors as well. And that would be our office putting out a recommendation for a national standard to get data from the agency to national data set, have it submitted within a certain period of time. Actually, to the state data set within a certain period of time. The survey that the NHTSA TAC did basically ranged from one state, 2 hours. I think that was the fastest. And we had states that allow within 60 days of the end of the quarter, which means you could almost be 2 quarters of data behind. So we're looking at a recommendation. You know, we haven't really set a timeline. I had said yesterday on a meeting publicly that, you know, if it was up to Eric Chaney, it would probably be 24 hours. I say that just because when you look at the results received in the survey, it looked like a large portion of the states already had that 24-hour requirement. And then I had talked with a couple state directors, one in particular, fairly large state. And although they allow 90 days, he does runs to look at how many calls have been submitted in what time period for his state. And he said most of them are in within 72 hours. So the agreement seems to be that a lot of these rules were written many years ago, sometimes when paper was still around, and that basically we just need to take a look at them and come up with a recommendation for moving forward. There was some talk about, you know, we realize that some of these are in statute or rules and they require changes, and this could take years in some cases. But we thought that now would be an appropriate time, given what we've learned from the need for more rapid, agile data or more agile response during COVID. Now would be a good time to take a look at that. The one comment I made, and the reason I bring it to this group, is I said there wasn't a technological reason why we couldn't do that. And so I'll ask this group if someone knows why there's a technology barrier in place with one of your systems that would prevent it from going to the state in 24 hours. I'd surely like to know about it. If not on this call, if you just want to send it to me privately, especially if it's, you know, something proprietary, or please let me know. I'll be happy to take that into consideration when I have the call with them. That's all, Julianne. Thank you.
Yeah, Eric, this is Clay. Maybe it's worth just calling the question out to states and to vendors. Have any states requested that records be held in the state repository for longer than 24 hours before submitted to the national level? I know several states have kind of had developed this idea that perhaps records could rewrite at the state level if an agency chooses to update some information within a certain period of time, and then only sending kind of the records after a delayed period to ensure if there's any early updates that those could be made. Are there any states or vendors who have been requested to hold records longer than 24 hours?
This is Felicia. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, Felicia, we can hear you.
So my question is, so are we trying to get the records from our repositories to NHTSA within 24 hours, or from the agencies to the state and then to NHTSA within 24 hours? If that makes sense.
I'll start off saying the absolute desire would be both. But I think the rules and the statutes that are out there that impact this are from the agency to the state. So maybe that's the starting point for the conversation.
Okay, thanks. That's what I was wondering. Yeah, I mean, we were trying to get ours shortened down. We have ours is like a month right now. We're trying to get that shortened down to like 7 days to kind of not do it like, not to go from 30 days to 24 hours, right? or even like end of shift would be better. But we're trying to get it a little bit shorter to kind of ease them into it before they freak out all the way. We have some people who, I think it's pretty rare now, but one or two who still do paper with one person entering all the data for somebody in a very small rural area. So there is still that. They did finally get iPads. That's one of very few agencies now in Utah that have that. But that does still happen, believe it or not.
Well, no, I believe it. And that's why we were trying to be very realistic about it and asking the questions up front and not just throwing a number out there and saying, hey, look, this is where we're going or where we should go. I want to be able to take that to the states and say, hey, look, here's what's going on. The technology piece, and then Clay said we've had a couple of states tell us, oh, we had a hold on records, and that kind of spilled into the conversation we've had about with Page, Wolfberg, and Worth about completed records, just the term complete or finished or finalized or whatever it's called in your applications. There's some folks that believe that I absolutely positively cannot forward anything that isn't 100% absolutely positively complete. And the way these systems are written, you guys can account and manage that. So it's opening up a couple other questions as we move forward, but it's something that has to be done. I will say we talked about end of shift in a couple calls, and we really just said no to end of shift because shifts are 24 hours, 48 hours, some 48 72s. That just seemed like it caused all sorts of problems. So we just stayed away from shift and started out picking a timeline for what that's worth in the conversation.
Yeah, the end of shift came up with some of our agencies because they have found problems with their crews go off shift and they don't finish the reports. So they'll wait till they come back on shift. So they're trying to make them do it end of shift. So that was their impetus for that.
Yeah, we'll take that. And the thing that Dia brought up yesterday was kind of interesting was, that this would require in some cases states to change rules and things like that. And we said, yeah, absolutely, we know that. But there also could be an agency rules or a county sets of rules or a municipality set of rules that need to be changed as well, because while the state may say 30 days, the agency may say you have X number of days to get them to us. And I'm thinking again, you mentioned some of the smaller services. So take a county that's made up of 12 volunteer services. The county may say, the state says you have 30 days to get it to us. The county says you have till the end of the week to get them to us. So if we said 24 hours, that impacts two levels of rules. So there's all sorts of nuances to this. And I guess my point in saying all that is we realize that it's not something that we would say it has to start tomorrow. It's not something that I have the authority to dictate across all 50 states. Again, as you all well know, this is kind of a consensus process. And, but it's something when I look at 50 states and, that's on my list of things to do to go back and see how many are actually at 24 hours. But I think it's at least, 20 that are already there. The question is, why are the others on something like 60 days after a quarter or something like that? So, it seems like all of our conversations anymore, and somewhere between A and Z is the middle ground where everybody can work, and that's what we're looking for. So that was why the question to you folks: is there anything that you know of that would prohibit us from doing that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So this is Clay. I'll just mention real quickly, we do have a new dashboard that we demonstrated to the state data managers that provides a way for them to just look at agencies' submission delay as the data comes into the national level. So it's kind of from the close of record until when we receive it. So it kind of talks about that entire time frame that Felicia was kind of breaking into two, which is important. The dashboard is undergoing maintenance this afternoon, so we will demo it next call, but it will really just provide states with an opportunity to look relatively at which of the agencies are taking longer, which are really good at submissions, and so that perhaps just give them some guidance if they wish to identify some areas to work on. It's subject, it allows resubmissions to be removed, so you can kind of look at your submission delays regardless of resubmissions, but it can be subject to someone retro sending records from a historical perspective that have been, a long time ago. So it's just a reference for states if they wish to do some work on their submission, like they can identify agencies who are doing really well and those who may need a little more help. So that will soon be coming.
Hey, this is Karen.
Mhm.
So I'm working with South Dakota, and during the DMC meeting, I actually looked at South Dakota's data and then looked into it further. And the worst agency in South Dakota, it turns out that recently they've actually been going back and entering data from 2019, 2020, as well as through so far 2021. So, first we earlier identified agencies that we hadn't received data from, trying to figure out what the barriers were. So in South Dakota, we're going to see it. The volunteer issue and people still using paper exists on greater than I actually expected in South Dakota, but it is happening as Felicia mentioned. So it isn't just one agency, it's many. But
Right.
Helpful was my point, Clay. It was very helpful. I dove right into it to try to figure what was going on. So it's a great report. Thank you. The only thing I would say is it'd sure be nice to know beyond the top 10 if we could drill down further somehow.
Yeah, so that's a good idea. Yeah, and that's exactly its purpose, Karen. So thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, just to take a look at kind of where your agencies are. Yeah, we can look at increasing it above 10. That would actually be a really good idea. And of course, you can, on the dashboard, you can drill down to individual agencies. But as Karen mentioned, if you wanted to look at, your top 20 agencies, how they're kind of doing, and your bottom 20 agencies, maybe expanding that a little would be helpful. So thanks, Karen. That's a good idea.
Maybe that could be a drop-down button to say top 10, top 20, or
yeah.
Like
okay.
It might be easier than, hopefully, Kevin.
Right.
Easier, but just a thought.
Okay.
Ray, one other thing I'll mention, sorry, it's kind of an alibi here, is the POST project that ONC, the Office of the National Coordinator, is working on to basically standardize a national POST data set, portable medical orders from an advanced directive. And there's several vendors from the EPCR community on that group that's working on that project, as well as at least one of the state data managers, and then a couple EMS personnel from the actual active provider in the field currently that's helping shape that. This is as I said, the Austin National Coordinator project. They are fully aware, and I'll tell you this just so you hear about it, they are fully aware of the diversity of how POST and MOST and whatever acronym people have applied to it. They are moving ahead with various meetings on this topic. And if you hear anything about it or you have questions, by all means, let me know. We have sent out the information on the project, and I'll make sure that gets out to this group as well. But this is something that is, again, not a short-term project in development, and then a long-term project in implementation. So just an FYI, everyone.
Hi, Eric. This is Kelly. I was curious about that project. Is the ultimate plan to add the POST fields and values into the NHTSA data set for provider collection, or have you guys discussed how you would handle that piece at the TAC?
Kelly, we haven't. We talked about, I think it depends on what they end up with and how the states feel about the adoption of that and the adoption of that as a standard. If they don't go high and right and they keep it pretty standard across the board, and we can get to an agreement, I think that would be a lot of value. As you recall from some of the conversation on one of the meetings, there was a discussion of what fields EMS personnel needed. Do they need every field on a POST or MOST form? Or do they just need the do CPR, didn't do CPR, had a form, didn't have a form? And then is it the discrete data, or is it just a PDF pulled into eDisposition 09? So I think all of that is going to be up for discussion as this process kind of shapes out. But for now, anything's on the table as far as us and NEMSIS. We're just really trying to make sure that, hats off to ONC. They didn't just go out and say, we're going to create this from scratch. They sat down with people and said, all right, how does EMS use this form? What's the important pieces? What do you want? What can you give us? And I think that's been a big help.
Hey, Eric, it's Mark. So we're getting a pulse right now in California, and there's just a lot of variables, but it is the PDF, so the medic sees exactly what was filled in, and there's no confusion about whether something was mapped incorrectly or entered incorrectly. They're seeing the actual real form. But there's a lot of variables that I hope everybody takes into consideration, one being the transport times. If you've got short transport times, the ability for the crew in the field to be able to get the pulse form could be greatly reduced, or if it's a real critical patient, they're not going to be picking up the computer anyway. So I just hope that they take those into consideration.
Yeah, Mark, let me be, and Kelly was on the call and some others I think that are on this call are on the calls. I don't even think they're at that level of discussion. I think the discussion here is if they created a national standard, what would that data be? What would it look like? And how it's used would not be something that this group would take into, it's not something, they're not trying to tell anyone how to use it. I think they're just trying to design if they could store this nationally so that when I'm in Florida, my MOLST form in Maryland could be accessed by EMS or someone if the family said, hey, he has a MOLST form or whatever. I think that's the intent here. How it's actually implemented, I don't think is the intent. Now, they do know they're taking into account things like I said earlier, what does EMS want and what would they need? And what I heard you say was what was discussed in one of the meetings. They want to see the whole form. They want to see the actual signature. They just don't want to see do CPR or don't do CPR. So there's a lot of discussions like that that's going on. But I'll certainly, if we get to the point where we're discussing access and so on and so forth, we'll bring that up.
Great. Thank you so much for keeping it all in mind.
Yeah, when you see that, and I try to do this, I'll send you they actually have like a project page. It's in Confluence that discusses everything. It goes down into, the project will create a CDA R2IG US realm. Hand to God, I have no idea exactly what all that means. And you folks know I'm not the technical expert, but I will certainly make sure that all of the information like this that comes out in the project is made available to you so that if you see it, you can say, hey, wait a minute, I need to let Eric know this isn't going to work. And then we'll be happy to take it forward, or we'll get the powers to be on this project at ONC to come in and do a presentation for you so you can help explain why it's not going to work for your systems. So that's my goal in all of this, is to keep you guys informed. So you'll have the whole project page on this at the end of the meeting.
Great, thanks.
Hey, Eric, this is Clay. I'm going to take you back one topic. I apologize. There were some great comments that were put in the chat in regards to this idea of having, a NHTSA come down with kind of a recommendation for data submission. And it speaks to both the point that Felicia and Karin made, that there's going to be some agencies, volunteer or even paper, that are just never going to make it, right? So I think Ann and Amber's point was, hey, what if your recommendation said something like a percentage, right, that allowed for those outliers? So say it's something like, federally we expect 80% of records, or 85 or 90% of records to be available in the National Repository by 24 hours, for example, right? So I think the idea of allowing for outliers would be helpful. Yeah, just to.
Yeah, and we can even say for those submitting electronic records. So if you're submitting paper, you really do not fall into that. So yes, we can certainly do that. And remember, these are recommendations. So, if somebody doesn't meet that target, then, there's not big stick at NHTSA that we can pull out and whack you with it. Now, if grant monies and stuff like that became available and they were tied specific to data, it might say, hey, look, data would have to be submitted within a certain period of time. I guess, and I'll say this, we've talked about it with the data managers and in all full disclosure, and this is, again, like Dr. Kramer says, editorial, this is Eric speaking. As we move into ET3 billing and submissions and we start looking at the requirements that are being put out, and these are being put out by ONC, the agencies that are dictating what the hospitals are going to have to do to bill, and CMMI and CMS is following all these. We're going to have to stay aligned with them as closely as possible, which is what we're trying to do. At this point, I was telling Clay the other day, I have 9 ONC projects that are tied to NEMSIS right now. I could use one full-time person just working with ONC on NEMSIS data. So it's interesting as we talk about exchanging data with HIEs and the network that they're building to connect all the HIEs and maintain the current data standard. As you folks know, I'm not sure how to deal with some of the folks, and I get it. I grew up in rural areas in Western Maryland. The smaller rural services, we can't plan to them. We can't program to them, but we can't write them out either. So I hear you loud and clear. We will do everything we can possibly do to make sure that there's enough wiggle room in what we do to account for everybody. But I'm very concerned at how to work with that population moving forward.
Hey, Eric, this is Ann in Arizona, and I had another thing I put in the chat too, but as far as rural things, I haven't worked with them a lot, but I've had really positive experiences with our Arizona Office of Rural Health. And I don't know if all states have that, but I feel like that office in our state, at least, really is in touch with more of the rural agencies, more than I ever really am as far as an overall, what their needs are. So every time they ask for something, a lot of rural agencies will be funding for an iPad so their guys don't have to use their personal iPad. We never have funding for that, but I always say, well, maybe reach out to the Office of Rural Health. Maybe they'll be able to find a grant. I don't know if they ever have, but. So
yes, in fact, we met with them at NHTSA's office. We met with their representative, and, basically the way it works is the Federal Office of Rural Health makes money available to certain states that qualify, and it goes to the governor's office. And then the governor decides basically what projects get funded, or the governor determines what agency is going to manage the pot of money. And then that agency creates a list, and that laundry list is, these are the topics to make sure they're going to get funded. So it might be, vaccine, or it might, and it's not all COVID related. That's probably a bad example. It might be pedestrian safety and bicycle crosswalks, funding school crossings. And then, as long as EMS is in there, then it's a category for it. So then when the funding comes out, it goes to the governor's office, to that agency, and that agency says, okay, these are the 12 things, the categories we said we're going to be funded. Out of those 12, EMS is one of them. So, hey, EMS, what would you like to fund? Now, that agency has to appropriate a certain amount of money to EMS, and I understand in some states that's been a challenge. But that's kind of a real high level overview of how the process worked. I think Dr. Kramer, I think Max, someone in our office was going to be sending out information to the states that were on the list for that office and had EMS listed, and then a separate kind of reach out to the ones that had the opportunity but were not on that list. So you're correct. Federal Office of Rural Health is very much in tune to the hospitals and clinics in those areas that are considered rural but are struggling in a lot of cases. So it was a good conversation, and you're spot on with your recommendation. A lot of it seems to be within the state. Is there that connection? Do you know the person in your state who has the money, or the agency that got that money? And if that's something you're looking for, give us a call and we can, put you in contact with someone who can tell you what that information is. I don't have a list of all 50 states or all the states that qualify and who got what, but we can put you in contact with someone who can get you there.
Hey, Eric, it's Mark again. You did mention, I came in a little late and I apologize, but you mentioned about the ET3. Is there anybody that's reporting ET3 data? Because California, I'm still seeing no ET3 data at all being reported. And I know that's not on the agenda in this, but you mentioned ET3, which then made me think about it. We're not seeing anything at all from anybody in this state.
And that's weird. I don't know. I'll ask Clay to address part of your question, but I know over 10 million records have been exchanged between agencies participating in the ET3 model and have made it to CMS. So
right, but those are just normal regular calls. There's no, because see, they submit every call that they're running, but I'm not finding any calls that contain any of the ET3 specific data elements and values. None. So, and I'll get with Schematron again, but I get a report every Monday of the use of any of those values, and it's always blank. So, I mean, every agency that's participating is sending every call, but that doesn't mean every call or any calls have ET3 data contained in it.
Yeah, Mark, that's a really good point. It would be good to speak to the vendors. I think the theoretical idea was that when an agency completes an ET3 related call and they're participating in that project, that a record goes directly from the agency to the ET3 infrastructure, the enclave there, and then a record also goes to the state. Whether the vendor has chosen to include the ET3 values or is mapping them back to the appropriate state and national elements before it's sent to you, which would probably be appropriate. That might be what's happening, Mark. I think I know you in California wanted to be able to track that as well, and I think New York as well also expressed that interest to ET3. But I think perhaps that's the data flow model.
Yeah, but then if that's the case, the records that we're getting would be erroneous or missing, and we require every record, and those are valid data elements and values, and so therefore they should be coming through. They're part of our Schematron. They're there. I'm just saying it. I can't imagine that an agency would say, okay, well, let's send this 99 records, but let's omit this one because it was ET3 when they're required to send 100 of 100.
Oh, got it. I think what I'm saying, Mark, is that the ET3 structure is using the NHTSA custom elements as are traditionally used. So an agency can add a custom element to add a value to an element, but then before it goes to the state, it maps back to the state approved element, right? So that's the model that I think they're using, not to dismiss.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. Okay. I'll get with Schematron and find out because, like I said, every Monday I get a report for the prior, and I've not seen one hit. And I can't believe that of all the agencies in California, not one, that everybody's on the same page. Yeah. And that they're all mapping it wrong or mapping it back.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I've not had zero, goose egg, not even one hit to go, yay, we get nothing, zero.
Okay.
So, okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to bring that up, everybody. I apologize, but
that's a good point.
It was a trigger.
All we know is the ET3 folks seem to be very happy with what they're getting. So if it was a mess coming out of California, I think we probably would have heard about it by now. So we'll look into it a little bit further.
Yeah, this is Josh. We meet every week with the CMS team on ET3, and in the next week or two, they are going to prepare an analysis to share with us that will look at how many of the calls they're receiving have ET3 interventions on them. So we actually don't know yet. It could be that that no one has done an ET3 intervention yet. But anyway, that'll be helpful when they share that analysis with us and might give us some insight. You know, if we're seeing very low usage of ET3 interventions at this point, then that would be reasonable that California also hasn't seen them. But on the other hand, if we're seeing a lot, then there's something to look into.
Appreciate it,
Mark,
Josh.
I'll run that query for you again too.
Well, you know, I work with one particular LIMSA that is part of ET3, and it's never even been turned on. I built it all out. It's all ready to go, but it's never been turned out because regulations don't permit to be able to take the patient to a site other than a hospital. So they don't have any facilities they can take the patients to. And I think that's a regulation in California that's holding everybody up. But again, I sorry everybody, I'm going to stop.
No, it's good to know. It's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, and there's some good comments by Caitlin and Adam in the chat related to that. So great. Yeah, thank you.
We had one previous comment in the chat, if I can bring it back to Pulsed. Drew from Creative EMS was asking if there's not a national registry already for advanced directives.
You know, there's a good site that explains the difference between Pulsed and other advanced directives things. I'll see if I can grab that URL.
Yeah, I think it's in the project page that we have, Josh, if you don't have it. But right now, everything is pretty much up to the states. And then whether a state recognizes it when they pull it from one state to another is another issue and topic for discussion, not necessarily for this group. Again, they're not getting into the how to use at this point. They're getting into what this looks like, this framework looks like for the national data set. But yeah, so the answer is no. Right now, if I'm in Maryland or my Pulse was registered in Maryland as a MOLST form, which is what they have, and I'm hanging out at my place in Florida, and I vapor locked down here on the beach or something, that's not necessarily going to say, hey, look, he's from Maryland. Let's go to Maryland and see if he has a MOLST form, as opposed to just going to the, hey, what's his national, what's his wishes? Let's look at the national data set. I think that's the ideal model. And as you vendors know, there may be just one or two custom data elements from each state. Maybe just one or two.
Okay, everybody stay muted. Let's not get in that conversation. Oh.
Are there any other questions, comments, concerns?
I have a quick question about the ICD-10 codes, specifically the U-code editions. I know that earlier, I don't know if it was this year or last year, it all blends together. We had figured out how to map some of the new codes to codes that do fall into acceptable codes in XSD. I think my question now is that none of you know that some of these codes are going to continue to be valid, and even there's a new set that's coming out on December 1st. Do we have any plans on changing sort of the allowed structure of the XSD for eSituation 9 through 12 to allow U codes?
Yeah, Keenan, I'll address that. That's a really good point. Yeah, there's been calls for, as you remember, right? The initial COVID codes came in as U codes, and now or Z codes, right? And now they've moved into the formal structure as M codes and J codes. Some have stayed Z codes. So yeah, the idea that we need to allow in the NHTSA standard for this preliminary holding stage that ICD-10 utilizes for the development of new codes before they migrate into formal structures. Yeah, that's in the queue for review for um, for a revision. So yeah, it's in there, Keenan. I'm not sure if that would be accelerated and made as an update to the standard. I don't know, Eric, have you had any calls from the CDC or others to fast track that request?
No, not at this point.
But that
It's on the radar, Keenan.
update-
Yeah, it's on the radar.
Would that update to the standards, sorry, this is Anne, would that be something that would be considered? Sorry, I still get confused. Would it be like a 3.6 or would it be like considered a minor update? Like a 3.5 dot something?
Yeah, no, that I don't think that would be a 3.6. But it would be a 3.5 dot. Yeah.
Thanks, Clark.
Yeah, thanks, Keenan. Really good question. And one of the more important issues that kind of bubbles to the top that needs to be discussed.
I go back to something I asked in the chat before, just because about the submission, I don't know, guideline that might be sent out as far as a proposed idea from NHTSA. One thing to consider is, what do you consider? Because 24 hours is, I'm not saying it's too short, but it's a shorter period of time. So hours matter more than they would have before. What your beginning time for that 24-hour measurement is, because we use E×03, which is unit notified by dispatch date time for several reasons. But obviously if you have a long call, that may make a difference. We can't use back in service time. Oops. Didn't do that, did I? So I'm just wondering if you guys have thought about that.
No, haven't even taken it to that level yet. Until we decide on a timeline, then we'll go back and determine when that's going to start. And, because if somebody says a matter of days, then that changes the perspective quite a bit. So, I think it's absolutely a consideration, and it's something we'll have to clearly define. But no, we haven't taken it to that level yet. I really want to run it past the state directors and get a feel for what they're looking for before we get too far down the road.
Okay, thanks. I guess I'm assuming when you said 24 hours in my head, then I set myself as 24 hours. So now how do I measure it? Thank you.
Yeah, just to make sure everybody was clear and heard my statement. That was in the world of Eric. In Eric's little world, we were talking 24 hours, and that is, as Carm and others pointed out, that may not be realistic at 2 days, or 3 days, depending on your service and if you're still on paper and other reasons. So, a lot more discussions to be had on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Clay, while we're formulating a list for things to be considered in the next revision, I would like to advocate for us taking all of the custom elements that we come up with that we think are going to be long-term elements and just roll them into the revision in the future. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Keenan. Are you referring to the national custom elements or maybe reviewing state elements?
I am specifically the national custom elements.
Okay.
And then if states find, overlapping elements, as we saw with the Ebola questions as they were.
Yeah. Thank you, Keenan.
And I'll add that we actually keep a formal tracking list that may already be on the list, because I know it came up in a lot of conversation when we were developing those national custom elements for infectious disease, but I'll make sure that it's on there.
Thanks, Julianne.
Lots of good discussion today. Thank you, everyone. I'll go ahead and point out that we have an October training coming up for state. It's a state data quality workshop. We try and do a training each year for anyone who's interested that is specific to improving some aspect of data quality. So Josh Legler and Monet Iheanacho will be doing this training in October on the 5th, even though it'll be specific to state products. If there's vendors or anybody else who wants to be on that call, they are welcome to attend, and it will be recorded and shared on our website as well. Anything, we've had such great conversation today. Is there anything else that anyone wants to bring up before we close out our call? If you haven't had a chance, there's some really good discussion in the chat. Thank you for using that feature as well. And we'll leave the meeting open so anybody can get the links or discussion out of the chat when we conclude the meeting. Our next V3 implementation call will be October 3rd, same time, same place. Thank you everyone for being with us today, and have a terrific day and be safe. Thanks.